We're back for your ears only. I'm Melissa Axelberth.
I'm David Alpern with this quote from the news. Our economy is like a car with 4 flat tires. That was Tehran World Trade Center President Mohammad Reza Sabzalipour on the visible depreciation of Iranian oil production as a result of sanctions that Washington and allied nations see as increasing leverage against Iran's nuclear development. In Israel, the U.S. ambassador said the necessary planning has been done for a military strike to prevent Tehran from actually possessing a nuclear weapon. Now this.
It's critical to our economy and the future of this country that we stop pouring billions on a counterproductive military presence in Afghanistan. The American people have made it clear that the war is no longer worth fighting.
As tempting as it is, Mr. Chairman, we cannot ignore the consequences of our actions. Leaving too fast would be bad for our security.
We have had some progress. We've also had some very helpful and positive political statements out of Pakistan.
As Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California and Republican Mac Thornberry of Texas disagreed last week in a debate on defense spending and U.S. strategy in Afghanistan, State Department spokeswoman Victoria Nuland was optimistic about renewed cooperation from Pakistan on reopening supply routes for the fight right now.
At least as important is the NATO summit in Chicago this weekend and what it says about the level of international commitment to the Afghan challenge and how our allies see the reported progress and remaining problems there. Recently back from his own firsthand look at the Afghan front lines is National Journal chief correspondent Michael Hirsh, and he joins us once again for Your Ears Only. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Recent congressional visitors have disagreed with the administration assessment that a U.S. troop surge has reversed the Taliban momentum, and we've read about an uptick in outright attacks and suicide missions. How did you judge the situation overall?
Well, the most interesting thing, David, is that I think the most dramatic changes that will impact the future have just happened, and it's difficult to gauge. And by that I mean the long-term strategic partnership that Obama announced a couple of weeks ago, really just a few days before I went to Afghanistan. That has had enormous impact on the psychology both of the Afghans who are running the government and the security forces, as well as, I'm told, the Taliban. Remember, the Taliban narrative was, we're just going to wait you out until you leave in 2014. Now the U.S., even though it's withdrawing most of its combat troops, except for special operations forces and trainers, is not going to be entirely leaving. And indeed, this weekend at the NATO summit, they are discussing the $4 billion or so a year that the U.S. and NATO allies are expected to commit to maintaining the Afghan security forces for the indefinite future. So I think that has changed the situation, coming on top of the Obama surge. And I came away thinking that perhaps all was not lost after all.
Some say even a decade of outside presence is not enough to see the most violent Taliban elements wither away. You cite some examples where the strategy did work.
Yeah, well, they've had an interesting program called it's a reintegration program. They've even come up with a new noun, reintegrees, for former Taliban who've gone back to their villages, given up their weapons, and sworn an oath to renounce violence. Some 4,000 of them now. Most of them are in the north and the west, which is the least troubled area, and an area where it's easier if you're an insurgent to give up your arms because you don't suffer as much retaliation as you might among the diehards along the Pakistan coast in the south and the east. But nonetheless, I keep hearing from Ambassador Crocker and others anecdotal evidence related to them by governors of some of the southern and eastern provinces that this program is working. And that's the whole approach. The whole approach is to try to induce the Taliban leadership, where most of whom are sitting in safety across the border in Pakistan, to go to talks while at the same time kind of hollowing out their army, the Taliban foot soldiers, as it were, who are really most in jeopardy in Afghanistan.
But how does that tide of reintegrees connect with the growing number of attacks on NATO forces by Afghan security forces they're training and fighting with?
Well, that is, one of the most worrisome aspects of this, and one reason why there's so much discussion about, a very firm or even sped up withdrawal date. I've been told of all sorts of measures that are being used to alert U.S. and NATO officers and trainers that are working embedded in Afghan units where these kinds of incidents are occurring. One method, for example, they call the guardian angel method, where anytime you go and meet Afghan troops, you have someone on your side that is a fellow NATO soldier who's kind of standing at the back of the room and monitoring the situation. So while those incidents, which have really sort of spurted in number since the revelation in February that Korans were burned by U.S. troops, while they continue sporadically, I was told when I was there that they have not affected the timetable, and there was no evidence that indeed they had affected the timetable.
Let's consider the NATO summit in Chicago. First, remind us how much our allies are winding down their own troop commitments.
Well, that's part of the pressure on the U.S. It's not simply that Obama faces his own pressure to draw down and to fulfill his own pledge. You have a new socialist French president, Francois Hollande, who made his own campaign pledge during his campaign against Nicolas Sarkozy, saying he was going to withdraw French troops by the end of 2012. Now, he slightly moderated that stance, adjusting it to just say combat troops. But this is part of the issue. There's now a pretty firm withdrawal deadline by 2014. The one thing we don't know is how many of the 68,000 remaining U.S. troops, the ones that will be left after the Obama surge unwinds in September, how and at what pace those will be withdrawn. That's the one thing that General John Allen, the commander of the forces there, and the president himself have not yet grappled with.
What level of Allied spending commitments for Afghan security forces and economic development do you think are required to show serious support for the strategy Washington envisions?
Well, that's interesting, David, because it really is not that much. If you consider that this ISAF effort, that is the International Security Assistance Force, which goes way beyond NATO, consists of 50 countries, I believe some 29 countries in addition to the NATO countries. What they're asking for is effectively about $4 billion for the Afghan security forces for the 10-year period from 2014 to 2024. Now, of that amount, the U.S. has already pretty much committed itself to about $2.2 billion, and the Afghan government itself is going to put up another $500 million. So you're really not, talking more than $1.3 billion from collectively all of these NATO and ISAF allies. And I think that there's confidence on the part of the Americans, the diplomats going to Chicago, that they can get that.
National Journal chief correspondent Michael Hirsh is recently back from his own first-hand look at the Afghan front lines.
Here's another quote from the news. This is really a surprise. It's really dangerous. That was Li Zhengfeng, Chinese Renewable Energy Industries Association president and a government energy policy regulator, on the American decision to impose anti-dumping tariffs of more than 31% on solar panels from China. Counterclaims by Beijing are expected. Still, China kept its promise to let a blind activist lawyer leave for study in New York.
Next, Greece on the verge, for your ears only.